Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth spoilers. So we've almost reached the end of spoiler season. Tomorrow, the full set, I believe, should be revealed. So we're almost at the end, but we still have some really sweet stuff to talk about today, including a ridiculous equipment for Spellslinger decks, a bunch more legends, some really sweet stuff, which means we should probably jump right into it and start talking spicy new Lord of the Rings cards. Before we do, some quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Number two, to keep up on all the latest spoilers, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. And number three, today is the day when they're revealing all the cards from the Lord of the Rings Commander precons, and Tomer's going to be covering those over on the MTG Goldfish Commander YouTube, so make sure to head over there later today and probably tomorrow as well. There's a lot of precons for this set to check out all the sweet new Commander precon exclusives. Anyway, let's talk Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. First up today, we got a new mythic equipment in Glamdring. So Glamdring, 2 mana, legendary equipment, says equipped creature has first strike, gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard, and then when the creature deals combat damage to a player, you can cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand with mana value equal to or less than that damage without paying its mana cost, and it equips for 3. So if this card seems kind of familiar, it's essentially a very upgraded Runechanter's Pike. Runechanter's Pike is essentially the first ability on Glamdring, without any of the free spell casting upside. So I think if you're playing Runechanter's Pike, this is just a huge upgrade, because you're getting Runechanter's Pike for +1 equip cost, but you're getting this really powerful ability to cast instants and sorceries for free when you get in combat damage, which kind of compares to like Spellbinder or Maelstrom Archangel, a twist on that. So the challenge of Glamdring is what I call the Sword in Once and Future problem. Sword in Once and Future, really strong card, has really good abilities, has good protection, but it has one huge problem, which is it's an equipment that wants you to have a ton of spells in your deck. And if you think about a typical 60 card format equipment deck, or even most commander equipment decks, like a deck that would play a Stoneforge Mystic, those decks typically are a ton of creatures, because for your equipment to work, you need creatures to put them on, and then a bunch of equipment. Glamdring wants something that most equipment decks don't have, which is a ton of spells, but then still enough creatures to get your Glamdring on something and hit your opponent to get value out of the Glamdring. This doesn't mean Glamdring is bad. It just means you're not going to play it in your typical equipment deck in 60 card formats or in Commander. If you want an example of a deck that could really use Glamdring, there was actually a Runechanter's Pike deck back in Standard that might be a good example of how you can make a card like this work. So that was a actually very strong Delver deck, and this was a decade ago in original Innistrad Standard, where you'd play Delver of Secrets, Snapcaster Mage, Geist of St. Traft, and then you'd use Runechanter's Pike to just make your creatures massive, filling the rest of your deck with cheap cantrips and removal spells. Glamdring would be perfect for that shell. Like a Delver wearing a Glamdring, once it flips, is probably going to kill your opponent in 2 attacks. A Geist of St. Traft is never going to die if it's like a 10-2 first striker. You just swing in and get the angel and hit your opponent. So maybe Glamdring could support that style of deck. I think there is kind of hilarious extra turn combo potential, like put Glamdring on an Invisible Stalker, hit your opponent, cast a Time Warp for free, and then during the extra turn, hit your opponent and cast a Elrond's Epiphany for free, and then during that extra turn, hit your opponent and cast a Time Stitch for free, and take 2 extra turns and hit your opponent and just keep doing this. I could see that maybe being kind of hilarious in Commander. I guess you could try to pull it off in Modern, although then you're getting into that inconsistency issue, because remember, you need creatures for Glamdring, you need spells in the graveyard for Glamdring, and you need the extra turn spells to cast. It's going to be hard to have all those things in the same deck. So where does this card really fit? And I think there's a couple of specific Commander archetypes where Glamdring is going to be an all-star. So first is spell-heavy decks that care about their commander's power, like Vadric or Captain Ripley Vance, probably the best examples. Vadric reduces the cost of your instants and sorceries based on its power. Captain Ripley Vance, when you cast your 3rd spell each turn, gets a counter and deals damage equal to its power to any target. In a deck like this, you put Glamdring on your commander, and you're going to go off with Vadric. All your spells are going to be so cheap, because it's probably giving your commander +10 10 power or something, which is a 10 mana reduction on spells. As you cast your third spell, Captain Ripley Vance is going to deal a ridiculous amount of damage to things. So I think Glamdring, easy inclusion there. It's also very good in Spellslinger Voltron style commanders like Riel the Everwise or Tagum Ojutai Master. These are really spell heavy decks that care about casting a bunch of spells, care about spells in your graveyard, but they also end up getting really big and trying to one-shot your opponent. Like Riel gets power equal to the instance of sorceries in your graveyard, so it's kind of already wearing a Glamdring. So Glamdring's gonna like double its power and it's already doing what a Riel deck wants. Or Tygum wants a bunch of spells because it can rebound after you attack with your Tygum. So you put Glamdring on your Tygum, so you're able to attack every turn without it dying because of first strike, and then you just start casting the free spell with Glamdring and getting to rebound it and getting so much value out of it. So it seems really sweet there as well. I could also see just slamming it in any Spellslinger deck. Like, does Niv Mizzet Perun or Vran Voice of Duality or Narset Enlightened Exile need Glamdring? No, not necessarily. Like, I don't think it's essential to winning with these commanders, but it's going to offer a lot of power because your deck's going to be full of spells, and casting spells for free is a powerful ability. So I think it's in the conversation for any Spellslinger deck if it's a card you enjoy. Like I said, I don't think you have to have it or it's going to be the best card in your Niv deck or whatever, but I think it's a fine addition to a Niv deck, and it is a pretty fun card. So Glamdring, very powerful equipment, but a tricky equipment to use because, like I said, you gotta have a lot of spells in your deck, and most equipment decks want a lot of creatures to go with their equipment. So a bit of a deck building challenge, but if you can build a deck to harness its power, this card can do some serious work. We also got a pretty spicy red enchantment in Fall of Cair Andros. So 3-mana enchantment says when a creature an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, amass Orcs X, where X is the excess damage. So let's say your opponent is a 1/1 and you deal 5 damage to it non-combat style. So with a spell or whatever, you would make a 4/4 amass Orc, or if you already have an Orc, you'd add 4 counters to it, and then you can pay 8 mana to deal 7 damage to target creature, which obviously not efficient. I guess if you make infinite mana somehow, you can kind of like go off and make a huge Orc and kill all your opponent's stuff, but kind of a backup plan. I think the big calling card here is that first ability. There's a few commanders that we have that care specifically about excess damage. Rith, Torolf, Agar the Freezing Flame seems like an easy addition to those decks because you're probably already building your deck with excess damage in mind because you want to make dragons with Rith or like get value out of Torolf or Agar. It's also hilarious with just mass board wiping burn spells that we have in Raid. Like Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. If there's a big board full of creatures and you Blasphemous Act, that's going to be an absurd amount of excess damage that's being dealt to creatures. You're probably going to end up with like 100 power amass or something. Like seriously, on a big board, this is going to make a huge creature. Same with Star of Extinction, 20 damage to each creature or planeswalker. So if there's a bunch of 1/1s hanging out, or even a bunch of 10/10s hanging out, doesn't really matter, just a big board full of creatures, you're going to wipe the board and just make this absolutely absurdly huge amass token, which you can hopefully win the game with. Just attack with haste and win, fling at an opponent and win. So that seems pretty hilarious as well. Also seems really good in Stuffy Doll style decks. Like Stuffy Doll style decks are built around dealing a ton of damage to things because you want to damage your own Brash Taunter or Boros Reckoner or Stuffy Doll so you can throw damage at someone else. Fall of Cair Andros seems like a perfect fit there as well. Also seems good with commanders that are just all about dealing damage to things like Piru the Volatile. When it dies, it deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature. That's non-combat damage. So you play Fall in your Piru deck, you sack your Piru, 7 damage to everything, wipe out the board, gain a ton of life because of the lifelink on Piru, and make this huge Orc. Or Nin the Pain Argus can snipe down tons of damage at creatures. You can make huge Orcs every turn. Jared Carthian True Hair likes a mass amount of damage because it gets counters when you're dealing damage to it while you're the Monarch. So I think I'd play Fall there as well. The other place you could play this card in Commander would be in a deck that specifically cares about Orcs. We don't really have Orc Tribal as a thing, but there are a lot of Orc cards and amass Orc cards in the Lord of the Rings set itself. So maybe Orc Tribal will be a thing now because of this set. Like Sikaar Deathkeeper seems like it works pretty well there. When a non-token creature you control is put in the graveyard from play, you get to make a Graveworn creature token with haste. So you play that, you play a bunch of Orc stuff, play Orc Tribal. As you're casting your Blasphemous Act and like wiping out a bunch of stuff, you're probably going to be killing your own creatures, which means you'll get a bunch of Graveborn tokens and you'll get the huge Orc with Fall. Or we got like Shagrat Loot Bear, which is kind of more of an equipment commander, but still it amasses Orc, so it would work well with the Orc plan. So I think this card is actually really cool. It doesn't seem that hard to get value out of in red commander decks, just because most of those decks are playing things like Blasphemous Act that are incidentally going to be dealing a lot of excess damage. And when this is 3 mana cast my Blasphemous Act, make a 20/20 or a 40/40, that's already a pretty ridiculous card. And then you get the extra upside that in the late game, you can use it as removal. Maybe you have more excess damage stuff that'll happen throughout the game. So I don't think this is like a staple Commander card, but there's a lot of synergies with some of the best red cards in Commander, so I think this card might be a little better than people realize. Next up, we got a pretty interesting blue enchantment in Lost Isle Calling. So 2 mana enchantment says whenever you scry, put a verse counter on it, and then pay 6, exile Lost Isle Calling, draw a card for each verse counter on it, and if you had 7 or more verse counters on it, take an extra turn after this one, activate only as a sorcery. So essentially you play it for 2 mana and it does nothing, but then if you can scry at least 7 times, you get a pretty ridiculous card. It's going to be like a overflowing insight plus a time warp. So I don't think this card is busted because it is 8 total mana. You need 2 to get it down and then 6 to activate it, and then you got to scry a ton of times in between. But if you can pull this off, it's probably going to win you the game. Like, there's a pretty reasonable chance that it is just going to be game over. So where do you play this card? And the answer, I think, is in scry-based Commander decks. I think this is too slow for 60 card formats. I would love to be wrong because it is a really cool card, but I think Elminster, Elgith, those are some of the most obvious scry commanders. Also sweet with like commanders that scry, like Kelsa, Gnostro, Sani. These are commanders that give you the ability to scry. Here it's worth pointing out that Lost Isle Calling, when you scry, it gets a verse counter. It doesn't matter how many times you scry. So let's say you activate Elminster, +2, draw a card, then scry 2. When you activate that, you're scrying 2, but you're only going to get 1 verse counter. Or let's say you attack with Sani and a ton of flying creatures, and you scry 10. You're not going to get 10 verse counters. You're going to get 1 verse counter. So it counts each instance of scry once, regardless of how many cards you actually see when you scry, which means repeatable scry is going to be better than mass scry. Like, think of Cryptic Annelid or Nethri's Puzzle Ward. These are cards that scry multiple times. Cryptic Annelid, when it ETBs, it scries 1, then 2, then 3. So you get 3 verse counters. Or Puzzle Ward, at the beginning of your upkeep, you roll a d4 and then you scry equal to the result. On the other hand, you got cards like Ugin Insight or Gravenlore. These cards scry a huge amount. They can be scrying more than 7 by themselves in the case of Ugin's Insight, but you're still only going to get 1 lore counter. So I think probably the best way to build around this is repeatable scry effects, like Retreat to Coral Helm. When a land ETBs, scry 1. So every land is giving you a scry, cast some ramp spells or escape shift, and you can get to 7 counters pretty quick. Trelisara Moondancer, whenever you gain life, get a counter in scry 1. So every instance of life gain in a Soul Sisters type deck is going to be adding those verse counters. Or Precinct Chimera, whenever you cast instant or sorcery scry. Same with Eye of the Watcher, but it costs a little mana. Sylvan Anthem, when a green creature ETBs under your control, scry 1. So these are the kind of cards I think you're looking for to really support Lost Isle Calling. Commanders that care about scrying and scry, plus cards that scry repeatedly. We also got a couple of new scry legends in Galadriel and Elrond. So these cards seem built to work with Lost Isle Calling. I don't know the Lord of the Rings lore here, but Galadriel, 3 mana 3/3, legendary elf noble. When the rain tempts you, if you chose a creature other than Galadriel to be a ring bearer, you get to scry 3, and then whenever you scry, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card revealed this way, you get to put it on the battlefield tapped. So again, a card that cares about repeatable scrying. If you scry a bunch of times, you're going to trigger Galadriel a bunch of times, and hopefully ramp a bunch of times, as you can set up the top of your deck with scrying. Actually a very, very powerful effect. And then Elrond, whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of cards you looked at while scrying. So Elrond actually likes those big scry effects. The Ugin's Insight, scry 10, counter on 10 creatures, and then whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell or an ability your opponent controls, you can draw a card. So this scry matters thing is kind of interesting because it's just something we haven't really seen in Magic till very recently. I think these are pretty interesting commanders. I don't think they're like super duper push. I really wish that you could play them together. Like, again, I don't know the lore of these cards, so maybe lore wise it makes no sense, but but this would be a super good partner with pair. You would have Galadriel to offer the ramp and then Elrond to grow your creatures. So I really wish they had partner with, because I imagine if you're building one of these as your commander, you're going to be playing the other one in the 99 because they just interact with the same thing. They care about the same thing. And if you go back to all those scry cards that we were just talking about, those are the exact cards you're going to want in these decks. You're going to want scry synergies because that's how you're going to trigger both of your commanders to ramp and grow your team. As far as building around these cards, outside of all the scry stuff we've already been talking about, I think the sweetest synergy for Galadriel is Retreat to Coralhelm. Retreat to Coralhelm is almost a combo. Whenever a land ETB is under your control, you can untap a creature or tap a creature or scry one. So the idea would be you play your commander, then you have a land ETB with Retreat to Coralhelm out. You scry one, try to put a land on top of your deck. You get to put it into play for free with Galadriel's ability. Then that will trigger Retreat to Coralhelm because it's a land coming into play. So you scry one and try to put a land on top of your deck, put it into play for free, and just keep doing that to like ramp a ridiculous amount super early in the game. If you want to go full on meme mode, you could actually build a commander deck that was just Galadriel's your commander, Retreat to Coralhelm and Thassa's Oracle, and try to just like put your entire deck into play with this combo. It would be hilariously inconsistent because what are your odds of drawing your Retreat to Coralhelm and having it actually start the combo? Not very high, but it would be really funny if you pulled it off even once, and you could do it really cheaply because the deck would just be one rare commander, Retreat to Coralhelm and Thassa's Oracle. So it'd be a funny like meme-ish $20 commander deck to put together and try to win with a single time. As far as Elrond, it likes +1/+1 counter synergies. I guess that's the twist here. The Shaper Sanctuary mode, once you get counters on your stuff, is actually a nice form of protection. If your stuff dies, at least you're probably going to be drawing cards if your opponent targets it. But you can also, on top of all the scry stuff we've been talking about, go like Hardened Scales. There's also additional +1/+1 counter synergies in Magic. So that's probably the direction I would go here. So these cards, I just really wish they had partner with. I know, like, flavor-wise, maybe that doesn't even work. Maybe that isn't how Lord of the Rings works. But if you could play both of these as your commander, you could build a really sweet deck. As it is, they're both still fine, fun, scry, standalone commanders with some cool synergies and potentials and even some combo potential in some cases. But I think, like, 100% of the time, if you build one of these as your commander, the other one's going to be in the 99. So partner with would have been so perfect here. We also got a absolutely horrible card in Rangers of Illithid. So Rangers of Illithid, 4 mana 3/3, human ranger with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of up to one target creature with lesser power for as long as you control it, then the ring tempts you. So you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't sound too bad. I play this and I can steal a 0, 1, or 2 power creature. Why is this card so bad? Well, the answer is we just have other versions that are way better. Mind Flayer, +1 mana, but it steals any creature. Sower of Temptation, same mana, you get a 2/2 flyer, and it steals any creature. So I just don't see why you would ever play Rangers when you can play one of these instead. Like a 4 mana 3/3 that steals a 0, 1, or 2 power creature just isn't that exciting of a card, especially when you see the rest of the competition. The only way I see this card seeing any play is if you just really care about the ring tempting you. Like, if the ring tempts you is all your deck cares about, and you want every single card that lets the ring tempt you, then sure, play Rangers. Otherwise, play Mind Flayer, play Sower of Temptation, play the way better versions of this card. In the world of lower rarity cards, we got another pretty sweet land for Legendary Matters decks, the Grey Haven. So Legendary land, ETB, scry 1, makes a colorless or a mana of any color among legendary creatures in your graveyard. So we've seen a few Legendary Matters lands lately. Plaza of Heroes, the best, I think, by a pretty significant margin. The Great Hall of the Citadel, also pretty good. I think that's also probably better than Grey Havens just because it's going to make mana for Legends earlier in the game. But the Grey Havens, if you're playing some sort of Joda deck, some sort of Legendary Matters deck, I still think this is worth a slot in your deck, especially in Commander where being Legendary doesn't really matter because you only play one copy anyway. But in those like 5-color, 3-color Legendary Matter Commander decks, I think this is just another auto-include land. We also got a card that I think is targeted a bit at Modern in Stone of Erech. So Stone of Erech, 1 mana legendary artifact, says if a creature an opponent control would die, exile it instead, and then pay 2 tap it, sack it, exile target player's graveyard and draw a card. So this is a pretty interesting graveyard hate effect. If you think about what it is, it's essentially Anaphens of the Foremost ability, where if your opponent's creatures die, they go to exile. nice little upside against certain decks. And then it's like a expensive Tormod script, because you gotta pay 2 to activate it and also 1 to cast it, but it does just nuke target player's graveyard, which is especially valuable if you are using your graveyard. Some of the other effects like this hit both graveyards. The upside that this only hits your opponent is pretty big if you have graveyard synergies. So if you think about what the static ability on this card does, it's pretty good against some popular modern decks. It shuts down Yawgmoth really hard. Their undying creatures just go to exile, don't come back into play. It shuts down hardened scales. Like modular doesn't work because when you sack your stuff to Arcbound Ravager, it goes to exile rather than to the graveyard. It shuts down scam. Like if you get down a stone, your opponent tries to do their little like grief reanimated loop, this is going to just send the grief to exile, so they only get 1 Thoughtseize instead of 2 or 3 Thoughtseizes. So that's a lot of value. And then the last mode, good against the typical graveyard stuff, just like Tormod script would be Living End, Reanimator decks. The only downside is leaving up 2 mana is kind of painful. The upside of Tormod script is it's free, so you get it on the battlefield and you just wait until your opponent tries to combo off with Living End or reanimate with Goryo's Vengeance, and you need no mana available to have it work. With this, you are kind of stuck leaving up 2 mana, so the inefficiency is a problem, but you are getting that static ability, which is nice. So where does this fit in the hierarchy of modern graveyard hate spells? And the answer is, I'm not exactly sure. Right now, the most played is Unlicensors because it turns into a huge creature. We also see Relic of Progenitus, Tormod script see a lot of play. I think that Stone is somewhere in that second group. It's somewhere in the Relic Tormod script group. I think I might play it over Tormod script, especially if it's cheap. We'll have to see how big of a drawback leaving up 2 mana is to fizzle your opponent's big reanimation turn. Maybe that's too much of a problem, although like Relic of Progenitus costs a mana, so it's not freaking it sees a lot of play, and Relic has the downside of hitting your graveyard as well, so some decks really can't use it because you don't want to exile your own graveyard. I would say it's probably just outside the top tier of graveyard hate, but I think that's still fine. Like, I think the combination of the static and activated abilities makes this a modern playable card in certain metas. We also got a new token producer that I'm pretty hyped about for historic and also for modern maybe, Shadow Summoning. So 2 mana, Orzhov mana, sorcery, create 2-tap 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. So not that long ago, we had a budget Magic where we played white-black tokens in historic, and it actually did really well. I would definitely play this card there, and in the past, there's been white-black token decks that have seen success in modern. I think this is a huge upgrade in those decks also. So right now, kind of the best 2-drop in a lot of these decks is something like Raise the Alarm, making 2 1/1 ground creatures, making 2 1/1 flyers instead is just like such a massive upgrade, and it works really well with all the other token producers, Lingering Soul, Spectral Procession, Battle Screech. These are kind of the heart of a white-black token deck. I think this is just new auto staple in those decks. Like, if you're playing white-black tokens, this is your 2-drop token producer. Not only that, but because it makes spirits and they have flying, this opens up some additional synergies. You see like Intangible Virtue, usually the best anthem for these decks, but now that your 2-drop is also making flyers, you could play Favorable Winds. You could even play Spirit Lords to work with this because you can make pretty much all your creatures into spirits. So I think Shadow Summoning, really big deal for token decks in historic and for modern. Unfortunately, those decks are not top tier, so I think this is one of those cards that like takes a tier 3 deck and makes it a tier 2.5 deck or a tier 2 deck. I don't think this card means white-black tokens is the new meta. You still kind of get blown out by Fury, but I do think this definitely improves right-back tokens. Speaking of improving token decks, we also got an upgrade for red token decks in Rally at the Hornburg. So 2 mana sorcery, create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, and humans you control get haste until end of turn. So essentially, you get 2 1/1s with haste with a little upside in a human deck. Right now, the best red token producer, Forbidden Friendship, makes 2 1/1s and one of those has haste. Rally at the Hornburg, I think it's just an upgrade here. Like, this is an upgrade because it's giving both of the tokens haste. Sadly, not legal in Pioneer. This would be an instant staple, I think, in the Boros Convoke deck in Pioneer. If we ever see that deck make its way back to Modern, maybe Rally will be part of that. I think it does just replace Forbidden Friendship, but certainly worth keeping in mind if you're a deck that was playing something like Forbidden Friendship. Now you can either play Rally alongside it, or if you only want one of that effect, Rally is the better option out of the two. We also got some little errors on WotC's side here. We got a new legend, Denethor Ruling Steward, which is actually kind of a cool card. A 3-mana Orzhov uncommon legendary human noble. Says being your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, you get a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and then you pay 2 sack a creature to drain each opponent for 1. They lose 1, you gain 1. So a fine uncommon legend, 3-mana 2/4, decent stats. Again, not something that's going to break the format, but if you're playing some sort of legendary aristocrat deck, human aristocrat style deck in Commander, this is a cool addition to that deck. The weird part about this card is the new treatment you're seeing. This is a treatment we haven't seen before. It's called the Scroll treatment. So apparently this was not supposed to be revealed yet. I think it was supposed to be part of the holiday release of the Lord of the Rings set. If you missed that, they're like re-releasing the set or a new take on the set. We don't really have details yet during the holiday season this year. So this treatment you will not get in any of the booster products or any of the products at all from this release of Lord of the Rings, but it's a little sneak peek at what's coming in the holiday release. So the treatment's actually kind of cool, and the card's not that bad either, even though we weren't supposed to be seeing this treatment quite yet. We also got a ton more uncommon legends. I think I've become desensitized to uncommon legends at this point. Just everything is an uncommon legend. Every creature that's an uncommon. It's sort of ridiculous, but tons of options to build low power commander decks, peasant commander decks, brawl decks. We also got just a bunch more lower rarity stuff, a bunch of ring temps use stuff, but you can find that all over on mtgpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Lord of the Rings spoilers for today. So tomorrow we get the full set. I don't know how much more is left to be revealed. We usually get a couple of things on full set day, but we've seen almost the entire set. So what do you think? How hyped are you from this set? Are you buying a box? Are you searching for the One Ring? Are you picking up singles? What decks are you building in Modern and Historic and Commander? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy it, and I should be back tomorrow one more time with daily Lord of the Rings spoilers. Until then, have a lovely day, and I will talk to you soon. Need even more magic? Well, check out yesterday's Against the Odds, where we try to build the biggest, most unkillable monster possible in Pioneer with 8-Flayer, or maybe the video where we built the saltiest deck possible just to see if anyone would even bother to play with us.